Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Steve Jagger and I graduated from Vancouver College in 1996 and I'm the co-president of the Alumni Association along with Mark Reed. The Vancouver College Alumni Association is a member-driven organization that works to bring all alumni together. We run the annual alumni golf tournament. There's an Irish Christmas lunch, there's a hockey game, fishing derby, etc. All of that has been canceled for 2020 due to COVID. And so we decided to do a webinar series where we interview interesting alumni and get sort of the 411 on where they are at and how they got there and what happened after Vancouver College. The neat thing about the webinar series is we charge $10 for tickets. All 100% of those proceeds go to support Vancouver College alumni-owned restaurants. We take that money and we buy a gift certificate or a group of gift certificates from an alumni-owned restaurant, and then that puts cash in the alumni's hand, and we hold the gift certificate for a prize to be used at a later date in 2021. Also, special announcement, Pat Mahoney graduated in 1996. We've got a bit of a 1996 theme going on today. Pat Mahoney and his team at Uno Gelato have decided that they are going to donate $1 for every pint of gelato that is ordered through the unogelato.com website to this Vancouver College Alumni Restaurant Fund. So if you are interested in doing that, go to unogelato.com, put your order in and put VC support in the comment section, and they will funnel $1 from each pint over to us to support these alumni restaurants. And before I introduce our guest, you can ask any questions you've got, put them in the chat or in the comments on Facebook. So let's get into it. Our guest tonight is Jeffrey Reynolds. Jeff graduated from Vancouver College in 1996 and currently lives in Virginia with his family. Jeff works at NATO and specializes in international security policy for Europe and North America, as well as innovation and transportation for defense organizations. He has 2 decades of expertise in international security, strategy, geopolitics, and forecasting. He has led several multinational and diverse teams that span cultures and industries on a range of security issues. When he's not flying over the Atlantic Ocean, which is probably now, he can be found teaching his kids how to surf or tackling an overly ambitious home improvement project. Also today, we have Aidan Sullivan, who also graduated in 1996, and so did I. Aidan is going to conduct the interview with Jeff for us. Aidan is a UBC International Relations and Commerce graduate. He currently works in merchant banking, splitting time between China and Canada. So welcome to you both, and I will pass it over to Aidan.
Good evening.
Hi guys, thanks for tuning in, and Semper Fidelis. Happy to have Jeff on board this evening. So Jeff, we'll start out with a couple questions around your past and your experience with the school specifically. So I know you, like me, came quite late in the game. Can you let us know when you arrived at the school and what was the impetus for you to come to Vancouver College?
Well, great, and thanks for everybody, and welcome. And I'm just delighted to be here. And yeah, coming to VC, I started in 1994, and that was entering into grade 11. I'd been through the public system in Richmond and elsewhere, and I think just my mother had always wanted me to go to private school. We weren't able to afford it, and then circumstances changed where we were in a position to be able to, or she was in a position to send me, and we searched around for some schools, and VC was highly recommended by some of her clients and people that she was working with in the professional space. So they heard about VC, and the next thing I know, I was doing intake interviews and walking around and with a bunch of people trying to figure out if I was going to get accepted or not, and got accepted, and showed up in September. And I think 3 or 4 weeks later, Palethorpe was ramming my head into the corner of a wall, and that's been pretty much it. So.
Okay, interesting segue, because I was just going to ask you about your favorite memories and best experiences. So, arriving quite late, obviously being a new student, what in the short span of 2 years that you were on campus, what would you say your favorite memories of the school would be?
There are I've just got a tremendous amount, and I'll tell you a couple of them. I mean, first off, from a from a leadership and a character and a development standpoint, I think one of the things that VC is incredible for in terms of its culture is the ability to blend a formal education with a high standard that we apply to. I mean, we walked around with shirts and ties and dress pants all day long, and just being able to take responsibility for yourself, being held to a higher standard, and having one-on-one attention with teachers, with also a spiritual element to it that infused everything in classes and in our extracurriculars, really did make it a special place. And it's rare now to have that. And coming through into my adult life, I understand that the core precepts that they were trying to instill in us, this idea of a strong religious founding, a strong school spirit, a sense of community, plus a rigorous academic program, has served me well. And it serves as a template for the rest of the academics that I've gone on to do. It's such a special place. It's hard to find schools like that now. And just by virtue of the fact that we've got such an incredible alumni community that stays in touch, just has a similar mindset, similar sense of humor, similar outlook on life, is truly enriching. And I'm blessed to have been a part of it.
Excellent. And in terms of that journey in the 2 years, would you say there was any specific teacher or class that would stand out to you?
I think there's a couple. I mean, there's Corbett's computer science class, which was fun and interesting when he wasn't out coaching basketball games, which was awesome. Mrs. Field's English class was always fascinating for me, and just her mannerisms were wonderful. And then there's Terry Shea's religious experience, religious class, or religious studies class. I truly love that. Encounter was phenomenal. Just a special moment in time to learn cool things about the hero journey and transcendental meditation, and being able to go up and read palankas of stories of people who loved you and all that. So no, not one favorite. There was just a bundle of snippets and memories that I hold dear. Lunchtimes in the cafeteria where we would all get together and just talk about random stuff. And I just really enjoyed it.
That's great to hear. And it's, listening to you speak, you're very well spoken. I know you're very well read. Everyone's going to hear in a minute, you're also very well educated. I'm curious in terms of, were there some classes that you took, maybe some of the ones you mentioned, or maybe some other classes that sparked an interest in you to go on to UBC and be a poli-sci major?
As I was getting ready for this tonight, Aidan, I was thinking about my journey from VC to where I am today. And I'll tell you where it began. It was Mr. Jacobson, the career counselor. God bless that man if he's still at VC or whatever he's doing these days. He had, I don't know if you remember, but we had a bunch of college recruiters coming in. And they would be like, I remember there was a woman named Annie Cappuccino from Brown. She was recruiting. There were other people from Texas Christian University coming up. And Jerome Lee actually ended up going down there for several years before transferring up to UBC. But we had a bunch of really great schools and a bunch of international locations that were coming there. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in grade 11 and grade 12. And then all of a sudden I went into Jacobson's office one day, and we were talking about ideas, and my family had gone to UBC, but he pulls out this book called Royal Military College. I'd never heard of it. And I said, well, what's this RMC thing? And I was worried about paying student tuition and stuff. And he said, oh, well, if you're worried about paying student tuition, this school beats the pants off of UBC. It's a wonderful program. You get trained as an officer. You go through the recruiting center. I couldn't recommend it enough. I had no idea about the Canadian Forces or the Canadian Navy at the time. It wasn't on my radar screen. And I remember riding the bus back to Richmond that day with this brochure about Royal Military College, and it just felt right. But it was Jacobson, of all people, who introduced me to the concept of military service. And it turns out in a weird twist of fate that I applied to Royal Military College. I didn't get accepted. I cried like a baby, but as a backup plan, I went to UBC, and the rest is history.
Okay, and that is very interesting. That you ended up at UBC as your second choice, but from all my recollections, you had a good experience.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah, so maybe if you to take it a step further, so you were a poli-sci major, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so, did you have from kind of that learning experience? Did that create a bend towards going into poli-sci and more of a security studies focus at UBC, and then through on to Tufts as well?
Well, funnily enough, so I go to UBC, and I've already, at this point, in order to enhance my application to Royal Military College, I joined the Navy. I joined as a reservist. Funny thing was, I couldn't do any of the choices that I wanted. I wanted to be a naval combat information operator, which basically is the person who tracks all the contacts of a ship, or be a naval signalman, which is the person who does all the semaphore flags. All those billets were filled. So the only thing that was remaining was to be a cook. So I joined the Navy as a cook, as a reservist. And I remember that was the year that VC made it to the basketball finals that beat the provincial championships. I'd been yelling so much that I couldn't even speak. So I couldn't take my oath because I didn't have a voice, because I'd been yelling at down for the senior basketball, for the varsity basketball team. And the reason why I say all this is I'm in the Navy, and then I go into as a reservist, and then I go to UBC. And at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was involved in political science, and I wanted to be an ecology minor of all things, which I somewhat forget and regret. But I talked to Dario Sponza, and I remember at the time he said, like, why are you, the history is an interesting part. Why don't you consider this if you're interested in politics? And so I went back and I saw what he wanted to, or I saw his reasoning, and I switched to a double major in political science and history. But I had a phenomenal time at UBC. Taking with me, I had a great grounding in terms of the education that I got at VC, and then plugged it in and took it to another level at UBC. Had a series of wonderful examples, and all the time connecting with VC alum. So Rob Laurie, of all people, got me interested in the International Relations Students Association, and he was the one that got me interested in Phi Gamma Delta. So this VC connection continues on with me throughout my UBC career. And when I graduate, I've totally revamped through my time to be focused on international security, taken some incredible courses, had some wonderful opportunities, going to West Point and working on model NATO 3 times, going to Washington, D.C., being briefed at the Pentagon, at the Department of State, had some tremendous experiences. But as you can see, there's all these echoes of VC that have helped guide me into that direction, just from teachers to students and friends and colleagues all the way through. And it was, I'm truly just so appreciative of it.
Okay, I'm going to guess on the next step of your educational journey, which took you south of the border. Unlikely you to have those VC connections, but you've been I know you've been continually educating yourself, in a variety of institutions, Tufts, Ashbridge, and Harvard Business School. So you were doing this concurrently while you were working, correct?
Yeah. So after I graduated UBC, I went and served at the Fleet Diving Unit Pacific, which is out in Esquimalt, British Columbia. And while I was there, I still was I kind of went into a little bit of a lull, to be honest with you. I mean, here I was flying high, getting my BA and having all this stuff. And then all of a sudden I go over to Victoria. I love Victoria. It's a wonderful place. But if you're 20 years old, that is not the place you want to be for a nightlife, right? Am I right? So I'm there. I'm living in a basement suite. Palethorpe's still over in New Brunswick, just so we can bring everybody else in. Prob's, doing his empire building of trucking companies and stuff. So, but here I am. I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm in Victoria, and what I I wanted to reach out and start giving back to and learning more about international relations and what Canada's role was, and just kind of carry on my education in an applied sense. So I called up the the Atlantic Council of Canada, and I said, I'd just like to get involved. And this guy named Goran Pesic says, well, I'd love to have you participate in some of our meetings. And I got involved in helping them out with some ideas while I was there at the dive unit. But the big thing there was that he offered me an internship of a lifetime. And he said, I've got an internship and I'm going to send you down to Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, Virginia for 6 months. And I said, great. What's transformation? And he said, it's this new command that's being stood up. All it does is think about the future of warfare. It's pretty amazing. I just came back from there. You've got to try it. So next thing I know, I'm driving across the country with my brother, and I'm now in year 15 of a 6-month internship. But I stay there and work every aspect of transformation. And to pull into this idea about Tufts and subsequent education, I had the opportunity to, when you start getting into the DC circuit and Brussels and start traveling, then I realized that a Bachelor of Arts is going to get you only so far. And these institutions really do require much more senior education. So I had the opportunity to go to a place called the Fletcher School, and that's it's a school for law and diplomacy. I studied international security there, Pacific Asia, and public international law. A phenomenal experience, and then came and there did some amazing stuff, like go to Japan and do relief work after the earthquake, and I just had a truly transformative experience. Came back, kept on working, and then had the opportunity to continue my education further at some of these other programs.
Cool. It's always nice to hear people that are doing continuous learning. I think it's could potentially be an interesting topic of around other VC alumni doing personal development, professional development stuff. So hats off to you.
Thanks.
All right, if you don't mind, we'll move more into your professional life. So
yeah,
I'm curious. What originally drove you into this field of, let's call it global security? What was the passion, or like you said, I mean, you just mentioned it a minute ago, it was a 6-month internship, and here you are, 15 years later, whatever it is. But what was the initial spark that really said, I want to get involved in this space?
Back at UBC, I took a class called History 425 with a guy by the name of Alan Sens, and he was and remains a masterful professor of international security. He was an external advisor to NATO. I had no idea what that meant at the time, but he awarded me an opportunity to go to the student conference on U.S. affairs at West Point. And then he also gave me the chance to go to the Model NATO conference in Washington, D.C. on 3 occasions. And when I was there, I had briefings at the State Department at Foggy Bottom and the Pentagon, and just getting a taste of being in the modern day Rome and dealing with serious issues, and then asking, well, how does Canada fit in this much bigger jigsaw puzzle? Really just sparked a passion and an interest that hasn't abated in 25 years or 20 years. But it was really all the way back to UBC, and it sustained it ever since.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you'd spent nearly a decade in the Canadian Navy, and thank you for your service in that respect. Can you tell us, in terms of let's say getting into NATO or a similar organization, having that military experience or Navy experience, is that a prerequisite or to get the job, or are you able to get into this field without doing military service?
You're able to get into it without doing military service but you are required to usually possess a master's degree and considerable work experience prior to your application. But it's an organization that employs a bunch of people and NATO is an alliance of 30 nations. And so they want representation from all 30 of those allied countries. So the competition is not just from fellow Canadians, of course. If you're looking to be a part of the international staff or the NATO international civilian market on the military side or the international military staff, any one of those bodies has very competitive positions. But by no means do you need to have military service in your background. I know a lot of people who are engineers by training. Data scientists are increasingly important. Often, many of them don't have a military background. Law is a big attraction, or having a law degree is also very valuable. But it's not. I know that NATO tends to come across as a somewhat of a monocratic or ethereal agency that few people understand, but it is actually a pretty diverse place. And there's a lot of different specializations and a lot of different expertise and national perspective and cultural perspectives that come into play, both in Brussels, in Belgium, in Mons, and then also in the outstations, whether they be Norfolk or any other one of those places. So directly answering your question, no, I mean, there's no real prerequisite other than meeting the essential qualifications. Of course, it's great to have a global perspective and an understanding of what defense organizations have to go through right now, or what they're focused on, and having some expertise on how they work. But a lack of military experience is not a showstopper.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that it's fair to say that most of us would assume that NATO is a bunch of old military guys arguing around in windowless rooms in Brussels or Foggy Bottom or all these places.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not the case. Can you tell us how the role of NATO has changed in the world since the fall of communist China, communist Russia rather, which was its original purpose?
Yeah, NATO is an incredibly adaptive organization. It started in 1949, so for 71 years now, it has been continually adapting to the contours of its strategic environment. And it is not a state organization. It is one that is responsive, and it constantly looks at opportunities for change while providing the structure that's absolutely necessary for the proper functioning of an international organization of its magnitude. In terms of the change since the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, I would say that the one thing that I think would surprise people is that the Washington Treaty, that underlying treaty that brings us all together, mentions the Soviet Union exactly 0 times in the document. There's no mention of the Soviet Union. It's all about making sure that it is a voluntary community of nations that are committed to the principles of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And that Euro-Atlantic community flavor has been the same as it was on day one, and that's by design. And so the changes are not to its actual core mission, which is to protect the forces, territories, and populations of allied states. But what it has done is it's changed the way that it delivers that security guarantee. So we've had shifting priorities in terms of coverage of the North Atlantic or diplomatic engagement and outreach elsewhere. And if I were to fast forward from 1991, I would say that the big changes have been really focused on the form, and that is going from its original 12 nations to in 1949. And having big expansion from the post-Cold War era onward, from starting in 1999, we're now up to 30 allies. So the footprint has changed significantly. It's pushed eastward, and there's also concerns and issues with Russia on that. But the bottom line is, it's grown in terms of it as being a force. It's focused its attention along what we call 3 core tasks of collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. So it's a multi-layered organization that has a mission set that complements those 3 very broad approaches. And the way that it delivers has become much more innovative. It's much more, especially recently, it's much more of a nimble organization than it was at a previous era. So it's changing, and it's changing fast, and it's changing to the contours of its strategic environment, as it always has. And comparing the two, I think to the layman, they would look roughly similar because we carry the same badges and have the same flag, but the function, the guts of it, are markedly different.
Okay, so obviously NATO has to be highly adaptive to the global geopolitical situation. So with, let's say, Russia as a, we still think of kind of Russia as the original founding or security in Eastern Europe for NATO, but that becoming, say, less of a threat, whereas you have China and the Far East becoming considerably more of a quote unquote threat, and you see the founding of 20 years ago of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where you've got Russia teaming up with the major sending powers of China, India, plus the stands, which totals roughly 50% of the world population. So is this going to create like a VC versus St. George's basketball rivalry that's going to dominate the global security strategy going forward, or is this the dominant theme now?
I can tell you honestly, in my conversations, with regard to strategy and complexity and all the other things that we're doing, never once have I heard the reference to St. George's versus VC, but I will be sure to let you know if that actually comes out. We have a series of potential adversaries. NATO's an alliance. It's a nuclear tipped alliance. It's one that has a bedrock of Western values. It's, as it was originally described, as a moral and material force for the defense of Western civilization. That doesn't mean that we are inextricably woven to a preclusive narrative of the future. So while I understand that there's the rise of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and new modalities and frameworks by which other entities and nations choose to cooperate, NATO is also a place for diplomatic consultation. And while we do have real market differences with countries like Russia, we also are looking for opportunities to engage on practical matters. And that is just a function of history, that no matter how much we may choose for Europe and Russia to live apart or live close together, by virtue of geography, there are always going to be neighbors. And we will have points where we overlap, points where we disagree. But we also understand at a professional level that there are opportunities to engage. There are opportunities to engage constructively, and there are also very clear lines in which we disagree, and we work to overcome those differences peacefully. And it's the same thing with China or any other actor. We have staff talks with the Chinese. I believe we have consultations with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm pretty confident that we do. And there's a high degree of transparency. And so if I could convey that the notion that NATO is just this large military organization that is basically designed for one thing and one thing only, that's not how it works in reality. It is a very robust diplomatic organization. There's a high degree of consultation, and there's a mutual benefit to ensuring that the Western order and the international order in which the rules-based order in which we operate continues for the benefit of everyone. And that's what we're committed to doing.
Okay, so again, learning about NATO as an adaptive, changing organization. I know that specifically yourself and a lot of, I guess, some of the previous educational experience we talked about that you've gone through along the way has been focused around innovation specifically. So yeah, curious to see, number one, you're a technology and innovation guy at NATO. So are you tapping my phone calls? And number two, what do you see as the largest, opportunities for and threats to global security emerging from technology broadly?
I can't speak to your phone.
Tap.
Yeah, exactly. I can't speak to your phone. I'm gonna say no. I mean, it's gonna be a hard nope on that one. But with regards to innovation, there are we are in a period where we are just seeing an explosive proliferation of human ingenuity unleashed by the use of technology. That is just, we are on, I think Steve would be in a better position to comment in terms of some of the numbers that data science is providing. But I mean, we're generating more data in the past 18 months than we have throughout the entirety of human history beforehand. And now these are ones and zeros, but it's the data lakes that are growing at an exponential rate that are providing with increased computational power and increasing sophistication in mathematics and algorithms, that we're able to make sense of a world around us that is rapidly unfolding in ways that we haven't even been able to do so even 5 or 10 years ago. So from a technological standpoint, the one question that I ask myself in a personal capacity is, can we adapt to all this changing all this technological change around us, and can we do so peacefully? That's the big enduring question that keeps me from sleeping in the morning. The Science and Technology Organization that's attached to NATO recently identified 7 emerging technology, disruptive technology areas, including data science, autonomy, space, material science, human enhancement, I think, is another one, and artificial intelligence. These are big areas, big areas. And I think that one of the other things in terms of innovation is you've got to we as an organization need to continue making the right choices in order to unlock the potential in every one of these technological areas. With regard to the threat that technology poses, it's not that the technology itself poses a challenge. I think the question is, who controls that technology? And we've gone on record saying Vladimir Putin said a couple of years ago that, to paraphrase, he who controls, or the nation that controls the artificial intelligence will rule the world. And there's others who believe that artificial intelligence is the last invention that humanity ever has to make, because then it's artificial intelligence all the way up for the rest of it. Same thing with regard to other opportunities in places like space. You've got, we're just seeing a rapid expanding set of opportunities, and it's being able to manage them peacefully that becomes the crux of the issue. We've got, what I would say from a security standpoint is that we have, that NATO continues to make the right choices in terms of innovating better, borrowing best practices from the private sector, leveraging research and research networks within NATO allied countries, and really serving as a clearinghouse to provide information so that we're able to continue to adapt and make the right choices with the fewest regrets possible when inevitable crises occur.
So it was interesting there. You brought up the point of call it best practices from the private sector. So I'm curious, what innovations, it could be technology, could be best practices, what have you, that you've seen that have come from the private space or private world or private industry and that have been implemented and successfully in NATO, or vice versa? Because I think most people think of government organizations as, again, not being super innovative on their own. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a high degree of crossover between defense and security and the private sector, and there always has been. It's been a level of complementarity, and so what we're seeing right now is a series of innovations, such as, I think conceptually and culturally, this whole notion of agile and Scrum coming from the software industry really is helping us revitalize our defense procurement programs. We used to use waterfall management and it worked. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you're building something like an aircraft carrier, a waterfall management method has its applications. But the idea of being able to rapidly prototype, fail quick, fail fast, get over it, learn from it, and move. Awesome. That's great. Same thing with new technologies and the new use of technologies that are coming through, particularly with regards to digitalization. So Siemens, for example, being a wonderful case study in how a brick and mortar organization manages to transfer successfully into the digital realm. You can say the same thing with Airbus. It's taken its model and said, now we're going to be a technology or a data company that actually just builds airplanes. And you see how they are taking their model of information awareness and using data points across the spectrum. So by the time a passenger leaves his or her house to catch a flight, from the time he or she takes an Uber, gets on board, has the flight, gets off, takes another taxi, goes to the hotel, Airbus actually is having that information collated and fed back. That type of shift is something that is an inspiration for us and shows us that there's a new and better way in order for optimizing maintenance records for AWACS aircraft or other things. So there's a lot of pull on that side. And I think that happens because both the private sector and defense and security still rule by the Darwinian rule of survival of the fittest, right? So there are lessons to be learned. And so while some people would say, well, they're different sectors and it's apples to oranges, there's actually a high degree of overlap that we can learn from one another. And I would say that in the past, the private sector's learned about hierarchy and stovepiping and organizational efficiencies that militaries provide for large organizations. And now we're learning more and more about how to use small technologies and be able to use them through rapid prototyping and being innovative in that respect.
Okay. So I guess through your personal development in both at school and in the Navy and in organization, I know you've done a lot of personal leadership development, and I'm curious. Also going from public school and to private school and high school, and then obviously the rigidity of the Navy and then NATO and business school, etc. Are there some key characteristics of leadership that stick out to you, and for the guys in the school watching this, what should they look out for in terms of personal development with kind of you as a model that you've seen when starting at grade 12 or grade 11, let's say?
I think when I started from VC, it's very much I think the leadership styles that I've learned have been different and applied differently, and I've seen some fantastic people. So going back to Terry Shea's class in grade 12 and about the lonely hero journey, and I remember him watching Star Wars videos and talking about how Luke Skywalker was the hero's journey and the quest that we're all on, the loneliness that comes from that, and then also the acting with character and principle, and instilling it in VC from an early age, the idea of having a grounded personality and one that is ethical and based in character and serving a nobler purpose. That sticks with me to this day. And then moving on into some of the other aspects that I learned from being in the Navy of being a member of a team and putting the team's needs before oneself was a tough lesson that I had to learn as an immature 17-year-old, but it's been an incredibly valuable formative experience. And that notion of small team leadership, taking care of your teammates, listening to them, being part of a high performance team. And I don't know how many places where you can actually get the teamwork level experience that I had on a dive team, where you just innately knew where your other teammate was, what his or her strengths and weaknesses were, and that you could actually feel where they were underwater. I'm sure there are professional sports teams that have that level of proximity and intimacy with one another, but it's a phenomenal experience that I carry with me. And then coming to NATO and seeing cross-cultural leadership and seeing it at a diplomatic and a military level, and understanding just what senior command looks like, the responsibility of command, how you command large organizations by taking, when you're at that senior level, taking the brakes off of direct one-to-one micromanagement, if you will, and being more inspirational has been wonderful. I think the thing that I've learned with NATO is that as an organization, diplomats tend to want to push for opportunities and for choice, and to expand and lengthen the decision-making window, whereas militaries like to have prioritization. And that's a very fruitful but very hot tension between the two realms. And so leaders on both sides, when they exemplify the best leadership characteristics, they tend to be extremely well-studied, extremely principled, extremely aware of the strengths and limitations of their organization, people in particular. They understand the context, and they're able to establish a vision. And what I've learned personally throughout this process with regards to core leadership principles comes from a bunch of different people that I picked up along the way. The first lesson that I've learned is that when you become a senior leader, you go through your junior leadership profiles, and you're like a PhD. You accumulate knowledge in one narrowing specific area, right? And you learn a very strong amount about a specific area. But when you start reaching senior levels of leadership, you have to switch that modality on its head and start taking in bits and pieces of disparate ideas, and it's up to you to synthesize them. It's all inductive synthesis at that stage. And that's a tough transition. The second piece that I learned, and it actually came by way of Shimon Peres, but it's absolutely valuable advice. And that is that big efforts in life and small efforts take the same amount of energy to do. So you might as well shoot for the big objectives. The third is that when you feel as though, as a leader, if you've got stars on your shoulder, if you feel as though those stars make you a better person than somebody with a hook or a lesser rank, then it's time to take them off. And so humility is absolutely key for any leadership at any level, but it's especially important the higher you go. And the last point that I would make, and perhaps the most important life lesson is that leadership-wise, is that no matter what, it's Viktor Frankl's key point, and that is no matter what you do in life and no matter what happens to you, your central gift that's given to every human being is that you have a choice to how you respond to that situation. And that's incredibly powerful. So throughout all of this, I could say that having a balanced life and good community of friends and balancing work and life, and I can speak more to that if you'd like, that's all important. But the central factor, those lessons that I've just said, with the special importance placed on no matter what you encounter in life, you always have a choice on how you're going to respond to it.
That's great advice for anyone out there, I would say. All of us that have been out of this a little bit older than 18 or 17 and 18 too.
Yeah.
All right. I see that we're at 7:45 now. We do have a lot of questions from the group. So I think that's a very strong point to finish on the topic of leadership. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. I'm going to put it over to Steve, and we're going to start firing some questions from some guys that have been putting stuff in here from Facebook and Zoom.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. Jeff, this has been great. So there's some questions on a couple different topics. The first one is, how's NATO funded?
Oh, okay. The nations.
Yeah, but how? Do they, is somebody paying more than others? Small nations pay, like, is there a mathematical part of their GDP or?
Yeah. So basically they have certain dues that they pay to Brussels through their defense and foreign ministries. And that funding mechanism is arranged. It's pretty formulaic. I will say that the United States does pay the lion's share of NATO's operating budget. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't want to go and say what they are specifically, but there are two major budgets. There's the civil budget, and then there's the military budget. And the military budget is an order of magnitude higher. And the one thing that I want to say is that NATO really has a core level of staff of which I'm a part. But when you think of NATO as forces and troops and everything else, those are all still under national command for the most part. So there's no NATO standing army. It's allies that fund those militaries. And so when you think of NATO just having this massive military budget, that's not really how it works. There is a military budget. It's common funded, but the militaries themselves are funded by the nations. And so Canada, of course, being a longstanding founding member, has its budget. And just like every other one, they pay every year and then maintain a standing military in order to serve and declare some forces to NATO.
Cool. You hear about this, especially lately, that like some of these global institutions are under some pressure, with the WHO, World Bank, the UN. Is NATO having that type of conversations? Are people pushing to change how it works, or to not have it at all, or the United States threatening to pull out? Is there any of that kind of talk happening with NATO?
Yeah, it happens all the time. And I think it goes back to what Aidan said earlier. When the Soviet Union imploded, there was this belief that NATO was a hammer in search of a nail, and people would say, well, why is NATO? It's either going out of area or out of business, or it's this unhappy successful marriage is coming to an end. And you hear so many pithy statements from all these foreign policy scholars. One of my favorites is, well, NATO's days may not be numbered, but its years are. And the bottom line is that this is an organization that for better or worse, it is a phenomenal organization in terms of being able to connect capitals together on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at NATO headquarters, each nation has an ambassadorial level permanent representative that has a direct line to his or her head of government. You also have a 3-star military officer sitting around a table. So you can literally grab a coffee in the span of an afternoon with a group of ambassadors saying, this is a problem that we need to do right now. Can you get on the phone to your capitals? Can you call them? Yep, got it. There is nothing else like that. So I think the first big thing is that NATO is a forum for consultation. The second is it's an operational partner. We have something that I would say is a crown jewel, is that we have an integrated command structure. So when there's crises like Afghanistan or piracy in Africa or otherwise, when nations come together, we have an existing command and control infrastructure that people can plug into immediately. That is not easy to achieve. A lot of investment, a lot of training, a lot of standards, and a lot of willingness to be able to put forces in there and have multinational people sitting in different spots and taking orders from one another. That's all been cleared and made legal. So being an operational partner is key. We train together. We have massive exercises together, and we've been doing it since 1949. And that ability has enabled us to make sure that when you're sailing and you're gassing, or you're fueling up in the middle of the Pacific, and a Canadian ship and a Turkish ship, for example, are switching supplies for one another, it's a non-event. You don't hear about it in the news because they've been doing it for years. And last, we're a custodian of standards. So all this stuff, in order to make an army or an armed force enter into a theater of operations, or for people to talk diplomatically, all that stuff requires standards and training and technical stuff and doctrine. All that stuff has been worked out. So my point is, if people say that they would, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love NATO to go the way of the dodo bird. The fact of the matter is, it is such a valuable alliance that the alternatives are just pale in comparison. And I'm not to say that that's going to make NATO live forever, but we do some incredible things. We're forward-leaning, and we're also voluntary. So people could leave if they wanted to, but they stay because there's incredible merit. So I'll leave it there for NATO. And with regards to international organizations coming under pressure right now, here's the point that I think is really key here. They're under pressure because they're needed. I mean, right now, for example, with the World Health Organization, yes, there's some issues that are coming up with it, but questioning the utility of the World Health Organization as an organization delivering a service to people, I don't think really is in question. There are some politics associated with it, but what we see with things like the OECD and the United Nations and elsewhere, these are playing imperfect but good roles in an increasingly complex and integrated international system, and we get rid of them at our peril.
Great. So Pat Whalen asked in Facebook, he said, what do you think will come from the explosion in Beirut yesterday? Regarding from Europe, NATO?
I don't know. So one of the things that I'm learning from my networks is that it was, the information is spotty. So there's an issue associated with getting aid there because the channels of aid are disconnected. I heard some statistic that around 80% of Lebanon's economic activity comes through that port, in the port of Beirut. So basically, Lebanon's economy has been just cut instantaneously. There's some deeper issues with regards to the explosion. So I'll go right now and say it was not a nuclear explosion. I know that there was some rumor that it was. The yield was like 1/20th the side of a nuclear explosion. There's no radiation whatsoever. So that's been immediately ruled out of the question. But the issue of why exactly there was that much ammonium nitrate, why it was a Brazilian cheap counterfeit knockoff of what should have been the real product, why it was why they were welding nearby, why it was stored there since 2013. I think a lot of questions are going to come down to, how did this situation happen? Why were there so many cracks that allowed an explosion of this magnitude to take place? And so looking across from the jurisdiction, and why was this legally laid? Why was something like this allowed to be stored in a facility like that? It was just so improper handling. Who was paying off, or who allowed that to continue to happen? That's a big thing. And then politically, the disaster response. The government, it will be open to interpretation to see how exactly we can get aid there, and how aid and rebuilding efforts can commence. It's already a region that is under stress. This is definitely not a constructive event. And I guess the best thing that we can see in these early days yet is that they can make sure that they get medicine and supplies there, and a proper investigative team to determine what happened with finality.
So I've got a couple last questions. We're almost out of time.
I'm happy to keep going, but yeah, I'll go for as long as you want.
Well, I've just got, looks like 3 or 4 here. A simple one, well, not simple, but does Trump win or lose in the next election? No,
I don't know, man. I just say that down here in the state of Virginia right now, I mean, it's a complex time, and I don't think anybody, given in 2016, or given the statistics or the predictions in 2016, so being spectacularly off, are going to, I don't think anybody's going to be like, whatever, Biden's going to win, or Trump's going to win again, he's going to pull it out. I sense that this election will probably be based around the pandemic and the pandemic response. And we're not talking about in the United States with, we are talking about it, but it still pales with regards to the pandemic response, is the economics of this. I mean, the contraction is significant. The protests that are taking place right now, the dialogues that are happening, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the United States right now. And I think that the broader issue that we're facing, is that I think we're shifting phases in the lives of our societies, and I think that there's a need for better leadership and for stronger leadership, more inclusive leadership, one that is more representative, that connects with people, and I think that this is an opportunity for those Democrats in the lower D sense, those who are committed to the principles of democracy, have an opportunity to redefine what the democratic space looks like in the 21st century. And this is the time to do it. We're in a period of transition.
So on that kind of topic, are the Russians hacking U.S. elections? Is that a thing?
Я знаю. I would like to think that they're not. I don't know. But I'm sure that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are tracking it. But I think that what I would say here is, I mean, regardless of what's happening, I would argue this. There are things that you can do as an individual citizen to dampen any nefarious activities in Canada, the United States, or elsewhere. Disinformation campaigns exist. And disinformation campaigns are particularly effective when people just blindly pass on sensationalist posts or memes or otherwise. So you can do your part. This is an excellent example of what good citizenship looks like in the 21st century. If it seems like the thing that you're reading is too good to be true, if you find yourself really stirred and agitated by it, hold off on sending it and make sure that you can verify it. That's an act of citizenship. That helps people in security out. That helps your nation out because you're helping cut all that type of stuff down. True.
Pat Whalen's follow-up question is, are you Canadian Jack Ryan? So here's switching gears a little bit. Does NATO worry about things like Bitcoin?
I don't think they worry about Bitcoin. I think it's the technology like blockchain we're using we're interested in with regards to logistics. I mean, the technology itself is fantastic for tracking and doing logistics and sustainability. And a lot of the portions of what we're doing in terms of maintenance optimization and just tracking basic commodities can be drastically enabled by blockchain and the technology that underpins Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But I think that that's a great question. And I would argue that the security space, what he's touching on is the security space is broadening. And we are having to contend with the remarriage of economics and security in ways that we haven't had to do since the dawn of the nuclear age. And so what we're doing is we have to have a better understanding of how things like counter-threat finance interact with the security space. And so cryptocurrency and other mechanisms, while they are usually in the domain of law enforcement, we need to have increasing awareness of how this happens. And one of the things that we realized in Afghanistan is that if you're going to go and detonate a vehicle-borne IED, for example, in Kabul, in downtown Kabul, usually the chain of financing and manufacture and training usually involves 16 countries. And so to his point, we have a military space, we have a security space in which we operate, but that is increasingly infused by other threats and challenges that happen outside of our functional or geographic domain. And that's what we're having to incorporate more and more forcefully in our strategic calculus.
Awesome. So final question to keep us relatively on time here. Where do you go from here? Like, what is there? You're in NATO for the next 20 years. Is there what's next for you? And you know, where does life play out?
I would love to come back to Canada. I mean, I love the United States. I mean, it's a fantastic country, and despite all the stuff that's going on, it's still a land of opportunity and just wonderful and gracious people. But Canada's my home. I absolutely love it here in Vancouver or elsewhere. I don't know. I just don't know. I do miss the West Coast.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet here. So if anybody wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do that? Like track you down through LinkedIn, or I don't know if you want to share an email.
LinkedIn would probably be best.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, and I'll share my email. Yeah, absolutely. Send me an email. I haven't checked it in a couple of days, but yeah, I usually check it daily.
Cool. Okay. And so I'll send the link for your LinkedIn account. So thank you very much for doing this. Aidan, thank you as well. Just a reminder to everybody out there that we do these webinars weekly. They are also on the YouTube page. So they're recorded and sort of saved on YouTube. And there's also a podcast that you can find it's the same content if you go to your favorite podcast tool, you can find the Vancouver College Alumni Association podcast. So thank you guys very much and have a great evening.
Great speaking with you, Steve. Thanks again. Thanks, Aidan.